Now we're going to go to the second domain, which is communication impairments. And again, there's 4 possibilities. You don't have to have all of them in order to have autism. The first one is delayed speech development. And this will change with DSM-5 because the DSM-4 criteria has a very loose definition of what's delayed language. So for this criteria, you have delayed language if you're not speaking words by 2 or phrases by 3. And nowadays, if a child wasn't babbling by the time they were 1, they should be referred for early intervention. So we have a lot better sense of the effectiveness of language intervention early on, and it's rare. It's pretty rare nowadays for me to evaluate someone who has been allowed to develop past the age of 3 with no speech. So still can happen, I'm sure, but it's pretty rare. So that's the first criteria. The second one is unusual language. So a lot of people with autism who develop speech have some atypical patterns to their language development. So for example, they often will repeat things that they've heard other places. Now, typically developing kids do this. That's one of the ways you learn language. The difference with a person with autism is that the things they repeat are longer, and the amount of time they spend in that developmental phase of repeating is prolonged, and the quality with which they repeat the things is different. So a typically developing child might repeat it, but they'll change the intonation, and it has the sound coming out sounds as if they are repeating it for clarification's sake. Whereas a person with autism, when they repeat things, it sounds as if they are echoing it back to you, as if it was a tape recorder and they press play. Echolalia is really interesting because there are some kids with autism who don't develop language spontaneously, but they develop echolalia spontaneously. So you'll have a kid who who can't say anything on their own, but they can repeat a whole stretch of movies, and so you know they have the motor skills to do it, and but they're not. They haven't. It hasn't registered that those are words that they can use to actually get something from someone else. And so you see this interesting pattern in some kids where they echo really well, and perfect inflection, perfect articulation, but they don't have a lot of spontaneous language. Well, once they start therapy, then you see their spontaneous language start, and sometimes the spontaneous language, their articulation stinks, and their tone is strange, and it sounds like a completely different set of muscles. It's really strange. And then as they're, as they increase in their spontaneous speech, sometimes you see the echolalia kind of morph into more productive language. So whereas they might have been repeating the same movie over and over again, as they get older, sometimes the kids can have so much in their memory bank that they can kind of mix things up, and it starts to sound like spontaneous language. And they can find the right phrase for the right situation. And that's a nice bridge. When you see that, you can tell that they're thinking about what they're saying, and they understand that this language, even though it's exactly what they heard somewhere else, when they're using it appropriately, that's a good sign. That's a good step. Okay, pronoun reversal is another form of echolalia, and that's when a child says you when they really mean I. And if you think about it, if you had to explain to someone how to use pronouns, it would be very difficult, because you would find yourself saying, well, when I say I. When you say it, you say I. And to try to understand how to turn that around is strange. But typically developing kids seem to pick it up pretty quickly. But the person with autism often has a hard time. And it's usually because they're just echoing what they've heard. So the last time they heard you say, do you want a cookie? They really liked that, and they got a cookie. So they might come up to you and say, do you want a cookie? Because they want you to say, do you want a cookie, right? So it's a form of echolalia. Neologisms is when you make up your own word for something. And sometimes kids with autism will have their own little way of saying something. It's not sometimes kids with autism will have a period of time where they speak and it's not intelligible and it kind of sounds like jargon. That's not a neologism. A neologism is when you actually make a word that everyone in your family recognizes, and you all use it, and pretty soon you all adopt it, probably because it's really cute. But it's something consistent.